Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for CEO Exclusive, brought to you by Anona Enterprises.
Good morning and welcome to CEO Exclusive, where we get emerging trends from CEOs and their most trusted advisors. I'm your host, Sohini Koch. And we love talking about different industries, technology, disruption, what's happening that we think that you CEOs need to know. And today we're going to talk about a variety of trends, but the overarching trend that we're talking about is construction and what's happening in the construction industry. So I'm really pleased to welcome the Griffco Design build team, their president and founder, Scott Griffin, and his SVP of commercial, Steve Ponsell. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So, Scott, let's start with you. What trends do you think our CEOs listening should know from your perspective?
Well, I think one of the big things that's happening right now in our industry is the move away from conventional type warehousing over to automated type warehousing, where you have, a lot of people in the general industries call it robotics, but, we just call it more of a lights out type warehouse where we're building facilities that you don't need lights in them anymore. Because
you also don't need people, from what you told me.
No people, therefore no lights. So yes, there's no people at all. So people, you can't really hire. It's hard to find people anymore. So that's the big trend. You see it throughout, particularly what we do is we build a lot of freezer buildings. And when it's hard to find people to work in a minus 10 degree environment anyway.
That's slightly uncomfortable.
Slightly, but people do it. But then now there's a big move from conventional type warehousing over to the very automated. The one we're doing now is 130 foot tall and has big cranes that run up and down the aisles, and there's basically no people in it.
So let's break this down for the CEOs listening, because disruption is one of the things that we follow pretty closely on the show. So I think I heard you say that you're working on warehouses where there are no people needed, and that basically it's fully automated.
Correct.
As you think about this, like, how many of these are you building? Is this a trend that you think is going to continue? What do you feel are the implications for CEOs who are listening to the show, and like, how can they pull this towards them and their industry?
Well, I think we're working with 4 out of the 5 major companies that provide public refrigerated warehouses throughout the country. And at least 4 out of the 5 right now are moving towards automation. So it's a big trend in our industry. We see more and more of that. And I think they've finally got to where they believe the ROI is there to do it. They've looked at it for years, but now the lack of people and the return on investment and the fact that the cost of automation is coming down, it has all worked together where, I think in not only our industry, but throughout manufacturing, throughout warehousing, and, the push. You look at things like the driverless trucks. There's a shortage of trucks. There's a shortage of drivers. There's a shortage. Everything is a shortage right now. So with those kind of trends going on, you're just going to see more and more move towards automation, robotics. It starts to pencil out where before it may not have penciled out.
Great. And Steve, what do you want to share with us? What trends are you seeing from your point of view that you think our listeners need to know?
I will just mirror what Scott said. Basically, it's just been the increased use of technology today. Scott's end of the business is much more automated, much more technically advanced than what I do, which is more on the self-storage side. But we've incorporated a great deal of technology that's come into the world today, specifically in how you rent units, how you access units, how you secure units, how you interact with the customer from a management standpoint. It's much more automated and application based over your phone versus the face-to-face situation that we used to see over the last 10 years.
Now, Scott, you said that some of the reason why this works is because there aren't enough people or not enough employees to work the warehouses. So are you seeing any displacement of labor at all, or is this really an add-on?
I think it's mostly an add-on. They're just not adding. If you build a new facility, generally it could be where they close down a couple of older ones and build a new one, but generally it's adding on a big automated part that can do. I think they had one of them said they would take 350 people to operate a new one that they're getting ready to build automated. It would take about 38.
Mm-hmm.
So, and mostly high skilled jobs, to manage the actual computers and the systems and things like that. So there's definitely it's changing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what industries do you serve?
We serve primarily in the food industry. There's manufacturers manufacture the food, whether it's agriculture or whether it's meat and poultry. All these they don't want to warehouse anything, so it's mostly we service the public refrigerated warehouses or either food service companies like Cisco and the like. And then they have in the grocery industry, we have a big grocery chain out in Texas we work with, do a lot of their warehousing type construction. So it's anything really in the food vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it's just driven by the supply chain and how the supply chain is started out with Walmart changing everything back in the day, because the reason they were so competitive was completely because of they weren't the greatest merchandisers. They were the landed cost of everything they got was primarily because of their supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
and what they did outside the box as far as their warehousing. That's how Walmart drove so many companies to really start to look at their supply chain.
Mm. Now, one of the trends we had talked about yesterday was about tariffs and how tariffs are affecting you. Steve, you want to share what you're seeing in terms of that trend?
Yeah, sure. So as everybody knows, or I think everybody knows, President Trump talked about and discussed some steel and aluminum tariffs and announced that he was going to put some in place in March of this year. And on March 23rd, the tariffs went in place. And we were immediately affected in our industry, specifically on the steel side. Most all of our buildings are structural steel components. And we immediately saw subcontractors contacting us and letting us know of what they called a force majeure event, or an act that's out of their control.
That's the act of God clause?
That's correct.
Act of politicians clause?
Right. Exactly.
Act of Trump.
Yeah. Which, if you didn't know about the event coming, you didn't know about it. But hopefully you had it negotiated in your contract. And in some cases we did, in some cases we didn't. We were fortunate enough to work with owners that were willing to sit down and come to a compromise in which we all shared in the cost and the pain and work it out. But certainly it put a stress on pricing in our industry, and we're seeing it still today. And he even, I think, end of last month added it to he had
who's he?
Trump.
Okay.
Had excluded Canada and Mexico, and now they are a part of the tariff also.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it doesn't necessarily affect services, I haven't probably been following this as much as I should. But I thought that it was like a little bit of brinksmanship, and that the tariffs didn't really go into force. So they are in force. They're being charged right now, and y'all are having to deal with it.
They are in force.
Okay. And so tell me about, for CEOs who are always dealing with surprises, how are you dealing with this? And how did you work through what must have been what really was literally an economic shock to your industry?
Well, I think the main thing you have to do is, if you see it coming, you have to work it out in your contracts, and you have to make sure you get everybody locked in. People will give you proposals, and they only want to make them good for 10 days. And then your owner won't decide for 2 months whether they want to do it. So what you have to do is you have to just put it in your proposal to the owners, and so they will know. And then it's all a big negotiation. But I think
because you don't own you're just building on behalf of people. You don't own it.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right. We work with subcontractors, and they work with their manufacturers. So it's a whole chain of people involved. From designing the steel to the different parts of it coming in, and we put it all together when we get to the site. But you got to realize that we've had times when, say, the oil goes bad, that affects asphalt prices, and people may not know that. It affects the cost of insulation. So a lot of these things work together. As far as where there's where it could be unexpected. And even in tech companies, I'm sure they may be seeing some increases in some of their raw materials and things. So, and even the threat of tariffs sometimes will make a big difference, because people go out and buy everything up, immediately. So it's interesting, even with what's going on with the big Chinese telecom company.
With
and now
ZTE?
ZTE, yeah. So now they're cutting a deal with them now. So I think there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that's driving it, trying to get more jobs here in the U.S.
So just one follow-up question on this. So has everything settled down? Was it one shock and then y'all sat down, you found all your contracts and said, okay, guys, we're going to just renegotiate everything? Or is it a continuing kind of rolling chaos, so to speak?
I think the lack of stability, there's no vision. There's the concern in the market that there is no fixed. It may or may not be done. It may adjust. It may go up. It may be relieved. Nobody knows. So a lot of the steel manufacturers are taking advantage of the volatility, and I think it's more the lack of vision that's kind of making prices fluctuate daily. I mean, people right now are having to buy steel on what they call spot pricing. Nobody's getting a 30-day guarantee. You literally are getting pricing based on day-to-day fluctuations in the market.
Mm-hmm. And so the question that I'm heading towards asking is, how do you manage in that kind of rolling chaos situation?
Well, I think the number one thing is, do you have to manage your own clients? Everything goes from the bottom up, it keeps going upstream, and, we're right next to the owner. And so what we have to tell them is, they know, everybody reads the paper and listens to TV. They know there's volatility right now. So we just have to, the main thing is communication. I mean, you communicate, and legally, you don't put that out front because these are relationships with clients and all that, but you have to let them know what's going on, and you have to cover yourself legally. But the most important thing, most clients are okay with it as long as they know the possibilities there, because it may not be, if they're doing a $30 million project, it may be a, $200,000 or $300,000, maybe $400,000 problem. And they figure out a way to get that done. But sometimes we have, the people below us, we have to manage too, the vendors that give us pricing. So we have to make sure that look at their proposals, and if they give us a hard number for X amount of time, we need to accept it, and they have to sign their contract and send it back. That's kind of one thing that happened to us. They held on to the contract for 3 or 4 months, and then next thing you know, they come and put the hammer down, say, what was it? They needed $300,000. $300,000. So we're like, okay, well, we've already got a contract with our owner. So we had to go back and do a little shuffling. Mm-hmm. So, but it ended up working out for us because of relationships and things. We, just doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, we're able to convince our owners that, let's say the owner came and said, we don't want to take that risk. We don't want to take the tariff risk. So we want you to include that in your price. Well, honestly, we're going to have to protect ourselves, and we may very well overprotect ourselves. And what we don't want the owner to do is overpay for any potential increases. So the fairest thing to do is just say, we will only ask to be reimbursed at the actual cost. And therefore he's paying for exactly what he should, and we're only getting paid for what we should.
Great. Listeners, we're talking to the team from Griffco Design Build, their president and founder, Scott Griffin, and their SVP of Commercial, Steve Ponsell. So now I wanted to shift to talking about you and your business and how you're managing and how you came together and how you're leading a team to be on the Inc. 5000. Scott, you want to take that? How are you managing, and just tell us about your leadership?
I think, the main thing, I think, go back a little bit. When I started the company in 2007, it happened to be right before the crash. And one of the big things in that time period, everybody, it wasn't a great time to start a business. So I kept at it and somehow made it through. But part of that whole situation was people like Steve became available. The talent was so great out there that I was able to pick up, if I could find any work at all, I could pick up really, really good people. And so some good came out of the crash for us because we were able to pick up Steve and his experience. He and I would have never got together if it wasn't for the crash, because he's very successful at developing self-storage and had a big background in operations and constructions companies and that. And we had met years before, back in the 80s. I was selling to him, and
isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So it's kind of what comes around goes around, but we, just keeping good relationships with people from way back, and always, I think he knew that he could trust me, and that we would just try to work together. And what ended up happening is after a couple of years, things started to take off, and he wanted to start a division within the company to do self-storage. And so I was like, I was all for it. So we cut a deal. I think that was good for both of us. And he really didn't want to start his own company. So it worked out. And I think we'll do maybe 40, 50 million in revenue in that industry this year. So that's the kind of thing and same thing with the other side of the business where we do foods. There's a guy I worked with 20 years ago at a company, and, we worked really well together back then. And so he was excited about coming on board with us, and real smart guy. One of the things I learned to build a company is, you're not the smartest guy. So what you want to do is hire people that are smarter than you. What you have to be is the team leader. I was always a good salesman, so I couldn't build a doghouse, to be honest with you. So I've never been a project manager or superintendent, but I did the business development side. But I always kind of chuckle. I said, well, you can be the greatest project manager in the world. You can be the best operations guy in the world. But if you don't have anything to project manage, it doesn't matter. Okay. So I was the sales guy. So I was able to, enough people had enough confidence to come on board with me. And so we got through the hard times, and I think we'll do close to 100 million in revenue this year.
That's awesome. That really is. If you take us back to 2007, how did you get through 2007? Because that was a very difficult time in the real estate industry. Did you have like one key customer that carried you? Like, how did you do it? How were you able to hire somebody who was equally talented? And yeah.
Well, what really happened is we went started in September of 2007.
That was
the worst possible time. I didn't really didn't know the crash was coming. It really didn't hit really hard till probably October 2008, I believe. But things were starting to slow down, and there was stuff going on where it wasn't really moving ahead, but then it really dropped in 2008. And so we persevered, but by 2009 in our industry, people had backlog in 2008. They still were building things because it takes a year to build things. So if we we had a year of building, and but in 2009 was the really bad year, which by the late 2009 I was down to 3 people, and I had run through all the money, my life savings. And so I borrowed 80 grand from my IRA, and was able to sell a small project here in Atlanta. And with that, I got that contract. And with that, I got Steve to come on board as a contract employee, and he managed that project with me. And so that started to build from there, and we just persevered. We had another deal, interesting story, where the Screen Gym Studios was coming to Atlanta. The movie business was with the incentives and everything. And I through a vendor lead and all this, I met a guy down at the old.
I met a guy.
So he was. I met him down at the Lakewood, where the Lakewood Amphitheater is. There's the Lakewood Fairgrounds, and that story, I met him there. There's kudzu covered Quonset huts out there, and we met, and then he liked me, I guess, because I gave him a price, and 4 or 5 weeks later, and I called him. I said, well, I'll send you the proposal. He said, no, don't do that. Just tell me how much it is. I said, well, it's 2.6 million. He says, well, you're low, but not by much, but I really want to work with you. So we said we worked there for 3 years, building and renovating all the buildings, and building sound stages. And so we were that was one of the first major movie studios.
Was that also your turnaround client too?
It was, absolutely. And the biggest, one of the biggest clients, a big grocery company out in Texas, H.E. Butt Grocery Company, very, very popular out there. I had been working with them since 1998 and had a personal relationship with all of them. And so in 2009, when things were really bad, they had a project that was like $4.5 million, and they gave me that project. So, and from there, I've been working with them the last 10 years since I've been in business. And I don't know, we've probably done $70-80 million worth of work for them. So there's a relationship again where, it started out in 98. I was working for a different company, but these guys just, they always liked me. So, I mean, they were, so I would, and I always hired great people. I mean, that's the difference. Anybody you can sell it, but if you don't have a team that can execute, then that's so I think part of the thing that I could do is just sell and build a team. build a team of people that believe in you. And if they, and they're the ones who really do the work every day. I just have to keep feeding the mill.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I would love for you to take us back to 2007, 2008 as well. And, you had a great career and you're at this place where you want to pivot. How did you end up choosing Scott?
Well, I knew Scott, like he said, from a previous relationship in the construction industry. And he actually, his company and the company I was currently involved in were working in the same building. So Scott and I saw each other on a regular basis. But of course, in 2007, I was in the development business, and that was not a good place to be. So as that all kind of fell apart on us, and we were unwinding deals and working with attorneys and banks to try to settle things out and move along, Scott and I just started having conversations. I knew that I would unwind and ultimately go back to work in the corporate world. And my goal was to do that for a couple of years and then ultimately probably go out and start my own company. That plan was working, as Scott had described. I went to work for him to help him out, and he was paying me what he could, but it was not what I needed ultimately to survive. But I was doing what I had to do. We moved forward, and as things got better, and I said, like I said, I thought I would eventually move back into doing my own thing. Scott and I sat down and started having conversations, and I was really impressed that Scott had the vision to understand that there might be a compromise between an individual that ultimately wanted to go have his own business, but yet at 50 years old was going, I really don't want to, I don't really want to take on all the administrative issues, the accounting issues, the issues of finding a building and those kind of things. I really want to focus on just going and building my book or building my business. And so Scott and I started having discussions about what I call a profit center. He calls it a business unit, but where I can come in and what really worked for us was that Scott, unlike a lot of CEOs, I think realized that what would be important is that I would have to have autonomy. It would be a earned autonomy, but obviously to make it work, because that's what most CEOs want, is they go into that business because they want to have that autonomy and the ability to build their vision. Obviously, it had to fall in line with Griffco's vision, and I think Scott and I saw that alignment, and I think that's what made the marriage work. Just the same vision and the same belief in how to get there and what's important and what comes first.
Man, there's just so many things to discuss here that I think listeners would love to hear about. But the thing that I want to go to is tell us about managing your emotions. So now it sounds really clean and easy, and like, you just went out and you hired him, and I just saw him in the elevator, and we decided to work together. I could imagine if you're down to 3 people, or you're unwinding a business and having to deal with lawyers every day, every week. These are not easy times. So what did you do to I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to get in the morning and I'm going to believe that this is going to turn out, because when you're sitting there before you get the $2 million account or before you get the $4 million account, for me, I know most people are not in a particularly happy place. Like, what do you do to get up and say, I'm going to keep going?
Well, I think ultimately I just had confidence. I just never questioned my ability to do it. And I never changed a thing at home. I kept I had 2 houses, kids in private school, a country club, all these things already. And I never changed a thing, so I kept them. They never saw it and they never felt it. I never got down. I just never did. I just always knew. I said, you know what? I was 3 months away from closing down the company because I was running out of money, but I was able to get this deal and get Steve on board and all that. So I just persevered. I always had confidence that I could walk out the door and somebody would hire me and somebody would pay me enough to pay my bills. So I never got down. Never did.
What about you, Steve?
I was a little different. I did change my lifestyle. I don't say drastically, but I did. I was a little more conservative in my approach. As I said, Scott was in place. He knew where he wanted to be, and he was trying to push that through. I was kind of in an in-between spot, trying to find a new vision, a new focus. So I was a little probably there was a little fear there from just probably not knowing what I could go persevere in. I think, like Scott, once I knew what I wanted to do, I would persevere. So I struggled to find that out. So I think once I started working with Scott and we started working on a couple of projects and very quickly we saw they were going to be successful. I think all of a sudden your vision changes. You see a bright future and you're you feel much better about it and yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's go back to the other point that you were making about being a CEO, leading other CEOs. Do you ever find there's a tension between giving them autonomy and then trying to manage and create a common vision and a common culture at Griffco?
There's two different sides of the company, and I'm personally more involved on what we call our food side, which is the big warehouses and freezers. So I have a gentleman I work with there, and I'm very involved in all that. But when and as far as the commercial / self-storage that Steve does, he knows. I have supreme confidence in him, and he knows everything about it. And I've never, it's been very successful. So I'd say probably one of the most important things to Steve is just the autonomy. I mean, we have meetings once a week, kind of go through things, and mostly, like I'm the sales CEO, so I'm mostly interested in what's on the sales things unless there's any issues I need to know about legally or something like that. But in general, it's I think you have to give people autonomy. I mean, you have to give them the ability to succeed. And I don't micromanage. I might micromanage a little bit on the other side, but not Steve. So I think he would agree with that. He kind of does his own thing, and as long as it's making money, and we just work together.
Mm-hmm. Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to make it sound like autonomy as if, please leave me alone. It's his company, and I understand that. But I think what makes it work is a shared vision. And if that didn't match, then the autonomy wouldn't work. I mean, you got to understand operationally, even though we're I don't want to say two separate entities, we're not, but kind of two separate departments. We still work with the same accounting folks. We still work with the same, internally, we still work under the same structure and policies and procedures. So there has to be some continuity there. So it's not like we're off, doing totally separate things. I think, what Scott's saying is just, he believes in, empowering people so that they can do what they need to do. Give us the resources, give us the skills, give us the training, give us the skills, give us the resources, and let us go win. Let us go play the game and win. And that's what works.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add to that. I think that we're looking at another of the same type situation with another group. One person inside and one person we're getting ready to hire, and we're going to develop another business unit within the company. And to me, to be an entrepreneur, you have to always look at those opportunities because you want to diversify. And so if you find it's all about people. So if you find the right people, you can say, okay, I have the resources now. We can put in place something. If you guys can go chase and execute the work, then I give them a big incentive to do that. But they don't. Again, some of them are in their 40s and early 50s, and they're not going to go start their own company, but they get really excited about having the opportunity to control their where they go and how much money they make. And so they, if you find the right people. So we're in the process of setting up another business unit type, industrial type work that we've done one, and now we're going to leverage from that, try to continue that market. So it's just kind of part of the growth plan. But it's not like one thing I'll say that I think is important. People ask me, where do you want it to go? Where do you want to take it? And I always tell them, I have no idea, because you don't have any control. I mean, if I have a good client wants me to go do 3 $50 million projects, I'm going to go do them, So you are controlled by your clients and what they want to do in your growth. You really, and I was with some companies in my history, when I was working, that would kind of decide who they were and what they were selling. And the market tells you who you are and what you're selling. So you don't tell it, if you think that is, then you're not going to be around long. So the big thing is completely driven by your clients and the market. So you have to have the ultimate flexibility. to make things, but to adjust.
Yeah, and I want to say something. I'm glad Scott said that about how we develop people and how we are looking at other business units. Because one of the things that CEOs face, and I know businesses face, is you hire a great person, you develop that person, he is very successful, he makes money for the company, he develops into a fantastic leader, and then what does he got to do?
Then he's gonna go out and start his own business.
So we're generating an opportunity for that individual to stay within the company and it be a win-win situation. I know that's cliche, but that's really what we're trying to do, is where he can win without having to go take that ultimate step.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing is having 100% ownership of the company is helpful, because I've been with other companies where you have 5 owners. Actually, one of the one I left, they had 5 owners, and because I cut a good deal and was helping grow their company, they didn't like it because I was making more than some of them. So, in this case, by not having too many people at the top, you can incentivize people and really well, and they can do very well. Whereas if you have more people and more, and I've learned that you can't be greedy. You're doing fine. You just want to grow and have people grow. So you can't. That's just part of, I think, how you grow.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, listeners, we've had a really interesting show with Griffco. Their president and founder, Scott Griffin, and their SVP of commercial, Steve Ponsell. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for a great show. You've been listening to CEO Exclusive. I'm your host, Soyini Koch, and I hope you have a profitable, productive, and very prosperous week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you by Anona Enterprises, where strategy is your access to money and performance. Learn more at AnonaEnterprises.com.